Now, for more on these developments, let's speak now to Jessica Genauer. She's Senior Lecturer in International Relations at Flinders University. Jessica, good to have you back on the show. Let me start by asking you about the hike. Has it allowed NATO to survive, well, at least for now, as an alliance, particularly with respect to Article 5, which is his core, mutual defense treaty? I mean, Donald Trump was saying all the right things, saying he's standing with the article, and that's why it was in The Hague in the first place.
That's right. So probably the single most important thing that's come out of this summit that I think the NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte is clearly very pleased about is this renewed US commitment to the alliance under President Donald Trump. And that's something that actually was somewhat in doubt because in the past, Trump has spoken about the NATO alliance not necessarily being in US interests. So that's one thing that I think is very important because the US does, in terms of real terms of funding and financing, the US defense budget, defense spending makes up 2/3 of overall NATO defense spending when you put all of the 32 member countries together. And that's just because the US internationally has the greatest military capability. I mean, if we look at the entire world, the US makes up over 1/3 of military spending worldwide. So it's very, very important for those NATO member countries that the US remains in the alliance. So that's one important thing. The other important thing is, of course, this unprecedented commitment to reach 5% of defence spending, including, as you mentioned, core military capability, but also other spending such as infrastructure and cybersecurity within the next decade. So that's also really important because that's unprecedented from what we've seen so far from NATO member commitments.
Unprecedented and sounds ambitious too, because even before this new target, some allies were struggling to meet the existing 2% goal. So Jessica, is it feasible for some of them to triple their spending in just a decade?
So in some ways, what the NATO alliance has tried to do with this commitment is to really make it an increase to 3.5% spending in real core military funding. And then there's another 1.5% with a lot of flexibility around what countries might actually spend that money on. So, for example, they could spend it on infrastructure such as highways or bridges that they claim would be necessary for transporting military equipment. But they might also double up as important for regular state infrastructure. So I think when we look at it like that we're really looking at an increase in that core military spending just up to 3.5%. I think we will get a relatively large number of NATO member countries, not everybody, but we might get up to at least 1/3 or 1/2 who will reach that within the next decade. And it's important to say as well that we've already seen, all countries this year expected to hit the 2% target of defense spending, and some countries spending far more. But that's actually not a result of pressure from President Trump or the United States. That's a direct result of the Russian full-scale invasion of Ukraine, which occurred in February 2022. So we see since February 2022, this really marked increase in defence spending from NATO member countries, particularly those countries who tend to be close to borders with Russia or close to a border with Ukraine. So it's actually that's really prompting this increase where we're already seeing a rising trajectory of defence spending from NATO member countries. And that's actually the main factor that makes me think it could be likely that at least, 1/3 to 1/2 of NATO member countries will hit that 3.5% defence spending plus 1.5% on infrastructure and other types of spending by 2035.
Jessica, I want to pick up on this point about Russia. I mean, I'm a little bit puzzled. I mean, what exactly does Trump want alliance members to spend more on exactly? I mean, for Europe, the big bad wolf, the bogeyman is clearly Russia. Trump has been ambiguous about Putin, and he actually wants Russia back in the G7. So what is this hike, as far as Donald Trump is concerned about? Is it a sense of injustice, or is it simply because he can?
Well, that's exactly right. So we're actually seeing a divergence between what we could call the core interests of European and other nations in the NATO security alliance, and then the United States itself. So I think that for European countries, of course, Russia is the key security threat that they're thinking about right now. And for the United States, I actually think the timing of this NATO summit and the way that Trump acted had quite a positive tone towards the NATO alliance in this summit is related to the recent altercations, you could say, between the United States and Iran, and ongoing conflict between Iran and Israel, where we're currently seeing a sort of a fragile ceasefire. So I think that US strikes on Iran and the US getting quite close to a possible escalation of, direct military strikes between US military assets and Iran may have made Trump think more carefully about the fact that the US also could benefit from having security allies. So, of course, the NATO alliance doesn't only protect European countries if one of them are directly threatened, but technically any country in the NATO alliance, which includes the United States, if they are in a direct military conflict with another state, can draw on that alliance and can draw on other countries to come to their aid. So I think that the recent sort of direct military altercation between the United States and Iran may have led Trump to value more seriously the NATO alliance. And I think that it's more Iran that President Trump would have in mind rather than Russia as a core security threat.
Okay, so adversaries, whether it be Iran or Russia, are watching closely, I'm sure. How do you think this defense commitment likely to be interpreted by them? Does it signal alliance strength or fragility?
So I think that there would be some concern, certainly from Russia in particular. So even if President Trump steered away from directly mentioning Russia and the Russia-Ukraine war was not such a concerted focus of this summit in the way that it has been in the past. But I think Russia would nevertheless be looking at this increase, this commitment to this increase in defense spending, which is a tangible outcome of this summit, with some concern. And then also just the fact that the US has recommitted in some ways or refreshed that commitment to the NATO security alliance. I think that President Putin would also view that with some concern, because President Putin is well aware that the US is the strongest military actor internationally. And so this definitely puts a question mark over if Russia's war with Ukraine were to expand to any NATO member country, would the US actually join that conflict with the full force of their military capability? And that's very much an open question at this stage. But certainly, according to the NATO alliance, yes, if Article 5 is triggered, then the US should come to the defense of any NATO member country whose security is threatened. So I think that Putin would be well aware of that, and he would be looking on this with some concern.
Jessica, great talking to you this morning. Thank you very much. Jessica Genauer, Senior Lecturer in International Relations at Flinders.